How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to be talking about concealed carry and self-defense as it pertains to knife laws in Ohio. Now, even if you don't live in Ohio, you may want to pay attention because when considering new laws or laws on the books in your own state or federal laws, this could be very important in understanding why our laws in Ohio are so abysmally bad. Because it's kind of a special case, and I see this sometimes with federal laws as well. Most of my videos are about firearms, and firearms in Ohio are actually, our laws aren't that bad concerning concealed carry. There are some very odd things, like if you are asked why you carry hollow points, you should never say because they are more deadly, because then you're basically carrying a firearm with the intent to kill rather than self-protection. You should always say because I'm more accurate with them. So little things like that are kind of interesting about our laws, but when it pertains to knife laws, they're extremely bad. Not because the laws on the books are so restrictive, it's because we basically don't have any laws. They're so vague that at this point, just carrying a knife is illegal. Now, most people will say, when you ask them in Ohio, what is legal to carry as a knife? They will say, if it's below 2.5 inches, police officers, when you ask them, will often say, well, if it's if it's longer than my badge is wide, which is basically 2.5 inches, or if it stretches beyond my hand, if you're holding it like this. That's not actually true. What they're actually referencing is the ordinance in the particular city you live in. Like Akron, it is 2.5 inches. However, knives under 2.5 inches, that doesn't mean that those knives are legal. It just means that anything over 2.5 inches is illegal. But it says nothing but about the legality of anything under. Ohio knife laws, as stated by the state of Ohio, there are none. It basically just says concealed carrying any deadly weapon is against the law. It doesn't specifically reference any particular weapon except for one, which is actually a ballistic knife in Ohio Code 2923.11. It specifically references a ballistic knife as being prohibited. But other than that, there is nothing. It just says that a deadly weapon. So all of what is actually legal or illegal falls basically to case law in Ohio. And the case law is abysmally bad. Basically, it's to the point where you can't carry a knife in Ohio. Many people think that their knife is illegal, but in fact, you can be brought in and put on charges of concealed carrying a deadly weapon for this. This is a Swiss Army knife. You may think I'm bullshitting you right now, but this is actually happened. I believe it's State v. Clarkson. He was carrying a 1.5 inch pocket knife on a campus, and he was prosecuted for carrying a deadly weapon. Also, there have been people who are prosecuted for carrying very small pocket knives because they said I'm carrying it for protection. Carrying it for protection automatically means that you are carrying it as a weapon, which is prohibited. A specific case of this is State v. Port, in which the court found that a 7.5 inch pocket knife was a deadly weapon total length because Port said that he carried it for protection. That was enough to convict him on that. Now, specifically, Ohio states in Cleveland v. Barnes, 1981, that it was found that whether or not the knife is a deadly weapon is a factual issue for the jury to decide. There are no laws on the books that say this knife or this knife can be a deadly weapon. It's basically up to the jury, the prosecutor, the cop that arrests you, whether they want to push this as a deadly weapon, and it's basically up to case law as to whether or not it is. Now, specifically, Ohio Supreme Court said in State v. Anderson, the state basically went on to say, to convict someone of carrying a concealed deadly weapon in the state must prove that the instrument is capable of inflicting death and that it is either designed or adapted for use as a deadly weapon, or that it is carried as a weapon, which would be, if you say you carry this for protection, it is a weapon, therefore you're concealed carrying a deadly weapon. Therefore, it's basically illegal to carry a knife. Some things they put down during this case were that kind of give credence to whether or not the knife is a deadly weapon is if it's a dirk, a dagger, or any knife designed for stabbing, So basically, a knife like this Shadow Tech would be out of the question. First of all, it's a fixed blade. If you have a fixed blade, it's out of the question. You cannot carry a fixed blade in Ohio. But because this knife is specifically for stabbing, it's out the door. It gets much worse than that. Balzongs are, of course, out of the question because you can open them with one hand and they believe that it can quickly be opened. Stilettos and gravity knives. I don't see very many gravity knives around, but they're out there. But basically those are some things that can give credence. In 2010, in a court case, State versus Catledge, the court found that their following circumstances may support in finding that a folding knife is a deadly weapon. Blade that can easily be opened with one hand, or gravity knife that is capable of one hand open. So basically, any knife that you can do that with is not good. That can be a deadly weapon. A blade that locks into position cannot close without tripping a lock. So any liner locks are out. Any sort of lock. If it locks open, you're out. You can carry well, you couldn't because it's too big. But if you follow those rules, under that particular rule, this would be okay because it does not lock into position. However, it's out for many other reasons in this list. A blade that is serrated, which includes steak knives. So you could have a serrated steak knife, and in that case, it would be considered a deadly weapon. You might think that's ridiculous, but in State vs. Hall, a woman became involved in an altercation with a steak knife. The court found that the steak knife fit the description of the deadly weapon, and Ohio Court of Appeals agreed. In that case, she was convicted of carrying a deadly weapon. Also, if a blade has a sharp tip, that also gives credence to whether or not it's a deadly weapon. In addition, there's a design element on the blade, such as a hole that aids in unfolding the blade with one hand, and if the knife does not resemble an ordinary pocket knife. So going back second to last, if it has a little nub on it or anything like that that assists in opening, that's a no-go for concealed carry. So basically any knife you carry is illegal. Now in 2010 in State vs. Thompson, court found that Mr. Thompson's knife was not a deadly weapon. The court said that there are factors that should be considered when deciding whether or not it's a deadly weapon. Now a lot of people bring this up as, well, I can defend myself because I have a reason for carrying it. One of those reasons cannot be self-protection. We've already covered that. However, basically what it boils down to is under certain circumstances, time, place, situation, it could be considered a tool. Some of those things are hunting, fishing, camping, and whether or not you're using it at work. Those are pretty much the only things that fall under that. Now, in State vs. Thompson, they tried to convict a man who was brought in on public intoxication charges for carrying a concealed weapon. So basically a misdemeanor. They were going to hit him with a much more serious charge of carrying a concealed weapon. The knife he had was used for cutting fiberglass at his masonry job. The only way he got out of this was his boss came in, said yes, he uses this knife on the job, and it's actually bent from doing this particular job. So this knife was specifically used only for that task, so it is a tool. I don't bring this up as to say, well, you can get away with it by saying, oh, I use it on my job or something like that, because you can't, unless your boss is willing to come in and vouch for you, which you might want to consider if he would do that, or you can specifically prove that that is the only thing you carry this knife for. If you're carrying it for anything outside that, especially self-defense, you're gone. So basically, because of this case law, it's not legal to carry a knife in the state of Ohio because our laws are so unbelievably vague. It's basically up to Judge Dredd, the arresting officer, or the prosecutor, or whoever, to decide whether or not you're going to jail for a very long time, or serious fines. The problem lies not just in our knife laws, but many laws in Ohio follow this, what I call a Judge Dredd policy. Now, I'm not downing officers. I have many friends who are cops, but cops. But in Ohio, we basically have these Judge Dredd laws. It applies to our speed laws as well. Speed laws are only suggested. You can get a ticket for going 25 and a 55 if the arresting officer believes that you are driving too fast under the given conditions. There's no really well-defined laws there, and it applies to many, many things in Ohio. We have very bad laws here. But when it comes to knives, basically carrying knives is illegal. You can look at the books and say, well, it doesn't define knives as anything except for ballistic knives, but when you actually look at the case law and what's put down as what should be considered a deadly weapon, it's everything. Anything you could carry, basically. It's up to whether or not that officer wants to enforce that law on that particular day. So every time you bring your knife out, which all of us do, pretty much everyone I know carries a knife, you're just rolling the dice. If you get picked up on a misdemeanor, they can easily hit you with concealed carry on concealed carrying a deadly weapon on basically anything. You could get put on a charge like that for carrying a screwdriver if they want to spin it the right way. Because like I said, there is no defined laws carrying a knife or anything, really. It's just whether or not that knife is a deadly weapon. Whether or not they can prove that you are carrying that for self-protection or carrying it as a weapon. Specifically, it says carrying it as a weapon in some of the case law. So basically, it can mean anything. Absolutely anything. They could hit you with it. And they do. These cases come up where you get people getting prosecuted for carrying a Swiss Army knife, for carrying a steak knife, for carrying just about anything they want to convict you of. Like I said, they're Judge Dredd laws. It's whether or not they want to prosecute you or not, you're going to prison because the law is so poorly defined. So you may want to watch this. If there are any laws coming up in your state concerning knives, guns, or anything, you have to make sure that the lines are very precisely drawn. Otherwise, you can run into these situations where, because nothing is defined, everything is illegal. So thanks for watching the video. It was a bit long, but I had to get that out there.